Hey you all, Farmer Jesse here. Gonna talk today about the no mulch, no-till system. It's actually a system that I have a lot of experience with because when we first started going no-till on this farm, in our tunnels, this is the system we use. So I'm gonna explain what it is, and I wanna talk about the pros and cons of it so that if you're developing your own no-till system or if this is one you've been looking at, yeah, some of the things we think about. Of course, as always, I do not have a monopoly on all the good ideas or good advice. And my system is not always the best. So yeah, please feel free to leave your insight. I think that helps people as they're watching these videos to go down and read the comments. I will try and answer as many as I can. So, those dummies were in the garden this morning. Yeah, that's how the day started. All right, let's do it. I mentioned no-till bed flips in this video, and then I realized after the video was done I could do a no-till bed flip without mulch right here. So I did that, and I'm going to show you what I did and how I did it. I'm going to flip this from baby greens and a little bit of radishes on the end to squash. Stay tuned for that at the end of the video. Alright, so these three beds, this is lettuce that we just recently harvested. There's some fennel right there and some chard. You can see all three of those beds were set up in this sort of no mulch, no-till system. And essentially for this system, we take something, there's my buddy. Hey bub. We generally maybe have a tarp down or something. The bed would be clean, weed-free going into it. So soil prep would essentially be broad fork it if you broad fork, add your amendments based on your soil tests, which would include some sort of nitrogen. So it could be really good compost. We don't have great compost. We're making our own, it's better, but, and that's what we added here was like a good compost that we made ourselves. But generally you'd add some sort of good organic matter, not like our compost, our mulchy compost, but like something that would be, you know, really good for plants. Then you'd add your minerals, and then you'd rake that, or you'd use a tilther or whatever. The tilther, by as far as I can tell, does not, I haven't tested this independently, but it just doesn't seem like it goes any further down than a rake. So if you're gonna use a rake and you have a lot of space that you have to do this on, you may want to consider doing a tilther. So anyway, you would get those amendments and stuff kind of worked into your soil, and then you plant it. That's, you know, we usually use the gritter to make the lines from NeverSink. I really like that tool. I think it's really, really special just because it makes everything so simple. But yeah, and then you'd plant your crops, and that's kind of it. So that's the no mulch, no till system, is that there's really just, you're not going in and tilling all that stuff into the soil. You're just kind of working it in loosely. If you're flipping a bed, you know, you're cutting your crop out and then maybe you're pulling the whole roots out. I don't know, it just depends on the crop. I know that Alex Eakins at Ace of Spades uses a weed whacker, and he just clears the bed that way, and then he sets his bed back up for the next crop in that same way I just described. He does describe that in episode 2 of the podcast, so if you have, I'll put that link up here. Okay, so I want to talk about some of what I perceive as the pros and cons of this. There may be others, but let's talk about pros. That bed prep is super easy. That's a super great pro. That's very simple, very straightforward. There's no real big concern. I mean, you're just basing most of what you're doing on your soil test, so there shouldn't be any concern with, you know, getting minerals out of balance or anything like that. You're just testing your soil per plot, and then you're getting the best, you're putting down exactly the minerals per bed that you need. So that's really easy. That's a great pro. There's also really great seed to soil contact. So if you're direct seeding something like this cilantro here, we just put a little patch there at the end of the fennel when we ran out of fennel, and it's really effective. Like, you get a lot better seed to soil contact, so you get really good germination. I think that's, if you're doing a lot of baby greens or you're doing a lot of direct seeding in general, that's a great option. And I think this with all of the no-till systems, it's nice to have a little bit of all of them, right? Sometimes if you want to do a bed of baby greens, maybe it's worth doing the low or low mulch method, even if your main method, like it is for us, is the deep mulch, like these onions right here. Those are all in deep mulch. And then another thing with that is that I think that the drip, if you're using drip, I find it works really well on this. So if you're trying to conserve water, if you're in a place where water is less available, then it works really well on low and no mulch systems. So another big factor is water retention. And this is something that I would think is kind of a con. Your no mulch beds are not going to retain the same amount of water at the same ability as, quite as well as your deep mulch beds. So that may take more frequent irrigation. It will also take more cultivation, which could also be considered another con. Where you save a lot of time in bed prep, right? You're not having to do wheelbarrows full of compost. You do lose a little bit of work. It does cost you a little bit more labor to actually go through and cultivate regularly. Weeds are way more of a significant issue. We just cultivated this yesterday. And you can see there's a fair amount of weed matter in here that I don't get in our deep mulch beds. It does require significantly more attention, more cultivation. One thing that NeverSink Farm does is that they actually add, some amount of physics balancing, which I think is kind of cool, adding peat moss or whatever it needs. Maybe you have heavy clay and you need to add sand or something. They add something to kind of balance out the physics a little bit, and that way that helps retain that moisture. But that is something more to think about, is if your cultivation will help you retain that moisture by breaking up the crust and breaking up that sort of wicking effect. And what I mean by that, let's say this hasn't been cultivated and it looks like we kind of missed it. You would just break that up with a hoe, right? And that leaves a little dirt mold. I should say that cultivation doesn't have to be a bad thing though, right? One thing is if you have a long season crop like chard, or maybe like tomatoes or like peppers, you have an opportunity in the middle of the season to get amendments into your soil through cultivation. So you put your amendments down and then you go through and cultivate your weeds, and that sort of works them into the soil very lightly. And that's a nice advantage to that. Another thing is that this is kind of a neutral, right? It's not a pro or a con, but irrigation is such an important part of this kind of system because the water retention is a little bit less, and so you're gonna have to think, like, if you don't have good access to irrigation, this may not be the best system for you. I could be wrong, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but it may not be the best system for you because it's gonna take regular cultivations. Now, that being said, I've dry farmed in a tillage system, and we did regular cultivations. We're, for the most part, able to maintain a crop, although our success rate was we probably lost 20 to 30% every year. So, and maybe less, depending on the year. What the season was like and what the weather was like. If we didn't get proper rainfall, things are gonna fail. So, it's a little bit more difficult to dry farm. Anyway, I'm gonna put a whole post up about this with a little bit more detail over at NoTillGrowers.com, like I did with the last couple videos. So check that out. If you all have any questions, let me know. If you have any comments, suggestions, criticisms, that's fine too. I wanna give a quick shout out to some Patreon members. We have some Patreon members who, if you appreciate this work and you appreciate that we kind of dive into these systems and test them objectively, then think about contributing a little bit to patreon.com/farmerjesse. Want to shout out a few people: Jackson Roulette, Dawson Mahalko, JM Fortier, Connor Crickmore, Josh Plymell, Kyle Platt, Jen Lawrence and Patricia Nold, Shane Elmore and Joshua Pearl. All of these people appreciate this work enough to keep it going. So patreon.com/farmerjesse. There are certain levels at which I'll shout you out in a video. Super cool. Anyway, other than that, you all, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye. All right, so as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm just clearing the residue with a really sharp stirrup hoe, and I just go back and forth. I think that arugula was actually in paper pot, so it came out fairly easy, but it came out with a lot of roots. Then the next thing I did is I came through and raked it, pick it up, put it in the wheelbarrow. Next thing, I come through and I broad fork. Just lightly, real lightly broad forking it, and then after that's done, the next thing that I'm going to do is add a little bit of amendments, rake it, grid it, and then plant it. And that's it. That's the entirety of the bed flip.